And now we come to the betrayal, where every single thing going for Merrick goes straight to shit. He returns to the Executor, where Darth Vader is waiting for him, with a whole fleet of Star Destroyers in orbit around it. Meets up with Vader. Vader's like, the Emperor's fleet has arrived. Merrick's like, oh, you lured the Emperor to us? When do we strike? I did not summon him. His spies followed you here. And he stabs Merrick in the back when Palpatine walks into the room. And this right here, to me, is probably my favorite moment in Sam Witwer's portrayal of Emperor Palpatine, because for anyone who didn't
Which
know,
is brilliant.
oh God, yes, he does such a good job. And I love this particular moment because he orders Vader to execute Starkiller as a way of proving his loyalty. And Vader starts thrashing him around the room with telekinesis and then sends him smashing out the window into the vacuum of space. And the whole time, Palpatine is just laughing
Cackling.
his ass off.
Yes!
Kill him, Lord Vader! Kill him!
You could really tell that Sam was having fun with this role because he put so much feeling and enthusiasm into it. Like, it's just so beautifully done. Like, seriously.
Yeah. When you actually watch Sam Witwer's interviews where he's explaining what it's like to play Palpatine, he's explaining that Palpatine is evil. He is as evil as you can fucking be. He self-identifies as evil.
Yeah.
And he's got a sense of humor and he knows how to have fun, which, is kind of the way that the thing that makes Vader
fun.
His version of fun, which kind of makes Palpatine almost admirable. He has found a way of life and a way of living where he is completely content and completely satisfied with himself and his place in the universe. Now, the problem is that himself and his place in the universe is like black pit of destruction and death because I am the Lord of the Sith.
Yeah. But anyway, he gets betrayed, and crazy enough, he gets tossed out in the vacuum of space. Now, normally, this would spell an end for most people, but shockingly, The Last Jedi is not the first time we see someone in Star Wars surviving the vacuum of space, and Galen Merrick gets recovered.
Now, I think
that there is put into a coma.
I think there is a justification for this because the implication I have is that Vader probably had that retrieval droid waiting out there already, intended to collect his body. So he was collected before he was killed by the vacuum of space. And when he was brought to Vader's science vessel for reconstruction, he spent several months in a coma being surgically reconstructed. Like, that's one hell of a recovery cycle. It's not like he just shrugged off the vacuum of space. He was in recovery for months, having his body rebuilt because of the damage this caused.
Yeah, that's another element from the novel. It doesn't really seem that way in the game because the game just abruptly cuts to him recovering. But yes, he was in a coma for quite a long time. In fact, just so people know, this entire series of events, the game and everything, takes place over the course of like a year. It's not just happening, one after another.
Yeah. And one of the other things I liked is that in the novelization, while he's in his coma, he's experiencing various force visions, flashing back to the past and flashing forward to the future, which is actually how the novelization is able to incorporate a lot of the cinematics and dramatic moments, because the novelization is structured in such a way that the only things directly featured are the things witnessed by Starkiller himself. So this actually serves as an effective vehicle for introducing a lot of moments from the game that he didn't directly witness. And
Rom Coda preparing his trap, Kazdan Paradas talking to his junk council, and as we discussed, Shaak Ti and Maris Brood's little conversation.
And he's kind of realizing the effect that he himself kind of has on the world around him. He's not insignificant. He's not just Vader's slave. He's got influence. He's got pull.
Yeah, it's basically the Force telling him, hey, your actions have consequences, and here they are.
Yep. And then he awakens. And I do want to take
this moment. Is not that happy.
Yeah, is not that happy. Because it's like the last time Vader's standing over him, and the last time he saw Vader had just chucked him out a window. And he's like, what the fuck, man? You killed me! No, the Emperor wanted you dead. I salvaged your body and brought you here to be rebuilt. And
Yeah. That's how
and I
Vader
do,
apologizes.
yeah, yep. And I do want to offer this little moment to offer my speculation on the nature of Starkiller's rebuild, because it is established that later in the storyline when Vader picks up a stone table and chucks it at him, it's a strike that should have killed him. He should have been crushed to death by a multi-ton stone table. He should be dead. But instead, he just comes away with a few cracked ribs, disabled, but still alive, which
Yeah.
to me is a very clear indication of the fact that Galen Merrick is no longer fully human. He is an enhanced human. He's probably got some cybernetics going on in there. So,
Most
there's a
likely.
lot. Yeah. Like at the very least, I'd expect that a lot of his bones are probably enhanced with metal. A lot of his muscle ligaments are now artificial. It's like a surgical reconstruction where it's just replacing existing parts of his body with synthetic materials, but not putting in any active cybernetics. But he's not regular anymore.
Yeah. And this sort of sequence is really where Starkiller starts to feel some sort of negativity towards his master, because he thought he'd killed him. So, but what's also interesting about this is Vader basically says, no, we need to, you're basically, your destiny is your own, and you need to rally the Emperor's enemies. Good luck with that. And even in that very moment, like, Starkiller is still like, yes, my master. But you could see it, especially on his face. He's like, okay, I'm not sure about this, but okay.
What
That
is
sort
thy
of thing.
bidding, my master? It's like it's a very
Exactly.
grudging thing. And it's discussed in the novel that he was really the only reason why he decided to submit to Vader in that moment was because it was the only way he wouldn't be killed right then and there. If he refused to
Exactly.
submit, he's done. Whereas at least if he submits now, he's got the option of just reneging later and fucking off.
hmm So he's given a new mission, and this time it is to rally the Emperor's enemies.
The Emperor's
And
spies watch my every
yep,
move. We must provide him with a distraction.
yes. And at first he thinks it's going to be an assassination, but Vader points out no single act is going to get the Emperor's attention,
Yeah,
which is where, yeah,
which actually is an example of just how far above and how far removed from the regular conflicts of the galaxy Palpatine truly is. He's
yeah,
very much insulated and cloistered away, which is actually one of my major criticisms for the show Star Wars Rebels, if you'll excuse the segue, is that the main characters are they're just too low down in the hierarchy of things to really warrant the attention of Vader or the Emperor. It's like this game is what it takes to actually get Palpatine's attention, to actually get on Palpatine's radar. It's like, sure, it's later revealed that the whole thing is Palpatine's scheme and he planned it from the start, but my point still stands. This is what it takes to get Palpatine's attention. You have to make yourself a real nuisance. You can't just be some insurgents on a backwater planet that he's never even heard of.
yeah. I mean, this is a guy who literally cloistered himself inside the Imperial Palace for Lord knows how long. He's just spending all of his time just, I rule the galaxy. I'm evil. I'm satisfied. Now I'm going to meditate on the dark side and maybe become a god, because why not? Because, then my ego might finally match my being.
So now that Starkiller's released, we get to the gameplay of this level. And this is the
hmm
first time you as Starkiller are truly fighting the Empire. And this is the
Yep.
point where you're not just coming up against regular stormtroopers. Now you're coming up against the specialist units who can actually do some
hmm
damage. The
Yep. Like
prime
the
example
stunners who are, oh, sorry.
the prime example. Well, actually, you mentioned the stunners first. The stunners who are basically running around shooting you with like electrified flechettes, and then you got the purge troopers. Oh
Oh, the
god, the
purge
purge.
troop
Oh
troopers.
god. Oh god.
Fun times to be had. And by fun times, I mean pain.
So much
So
pain.
much pain.
The only ability that's useful against these guys is Force Lightning. Otherwise, they can take a tremendous beating. If you're fighting these guys, pray to God that there's a bottomless pit that you can knock them down, because because taking these guys on is a grind. And I mean this in the best possible way. It's a challenge to engage these
Yeah.
guys because
It's not a chore. It's just good old fashioned fun, which is enjoyable.
But
So
it's difficult because the pain.
another little interesting thing about this particular level, I should say, that's discussed in novelization is that at this point, Starkiller doesn't have his lightsaber. It was lost to him when he was flown into space. So Proxy gives him Rom Koda's lightsaber, which he recovered from the first mission. So this whole time he's using Rom Koda's green blade.
Yeah. So, which is not reflected in the comic adaptation or in
the game.
The game. I suppose if you, I know that the PS2 and Wii versions of the game do allow you to choose your lightsaber hilt as well as your crystal color. So if you want to, you probably could do a playthrough of those games where you actually do have Koda's lightsaber with a green blade for these missions, but it doesn't actually show up in the X360 versions or in the.
He just has his lightsaber. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which doesn't make too much sense when you really think about it. So I'm glad the novelization included that.
It addressed that factor. So.
So they're making their way off the ship because Proxy, being the proactive droid he is, set it on a collision with a nearby star. And, driving your ship into a star is not exactly going to end well for you if you're on it. So they got to get out of there quick. Problem is, Juno is also there as well. And Starkiller's like, no, I'm not leaving her to burn. So they rescue her.
Because, when you actually stop and think about it, Juno is the first person in Starkiller's entire life that he's ever actually met, a person that he's able to connect with on an emotional level who isn't a threat to his life.
Right. He rescues her and they go on the Rogue Shadow, and now they plan to carry out, she doesn't know about his mission, but he knows what he has to do now. And they realize that in order to rally the Emperor's enemies, they're going to need some help, particularly help in the form of a Jedi. And as we know at this point, there is one Jedi out there who Starkiller has encountered that is still alive.
Yep.
General Coda.
General Coda. And one of the other things I did mention here is that he specifically mentions, and I need to find a Jedi who can train me in some of the things that Vader couldn't, which is one little area of Starkiller starting to rebel against Vader. He's like, okay, Vader can't be fully trusted, so I can't rely on him to provide me with all of my dark side knowledge, so I need to start being proactive and seeking out knowledge on my own. And if that means looking into Jedi lore and looking at some of their stuff, okay, let's do it.
So, Bespin, we're near Cloud City, but we're not on Cloud City, so no Lando cameo. We are on one of the many, many gas mines that inhabit the planet, and Galen Merrick does find Rom Koda drunk at a bar with a bandage all over his eyes.
A dive bar, no less.
Yes, so clearly things have not been going well for our general in the intermeeting time after his fight, to say the least. He is not in a good place, which I will say this, and I did kind of mention this in the Cast and Parada section, but I like how this game showcases how a Jedi can still lose it without going to the dark side. You can still fall off the deep end without losing your soul, which I like. It adds a bit more realism to this situation, to say the least.
And it's another way of addressing how some Jedi were broken by the fall of the Order. It's like, Coda obviously had to get his ass handed to him by a dark side acolyte before he was actually broken, but you get the impression that there are probably lots of other Jedi who came to this spot immediately, where the destruction of everything they loved, they just stopped caring, shut themselves off, and tried to numb themselves to the world. I can only imagine how many Jedi decided to just lose themselves in drug addiction because they would rather just burn out and be a junkie than have to deal with the universe around them being controlled by everything that they dedicated their lives to destroying.
Yes, and what's interesting is Coda is actually cut off from the Force at this point, because he can't sense who he's actually talking to. He is actually not aware that he is speaking to Galen Merrick, which does also make a lot of sense in the context of their fight, because he never actually spoke, so he can't recognize him by voice either.
Yeah, or if he can, all he can recognize him by are his cries of pain every time he takes a hit. Which
exactly.
How are you going to recognize someone's speech pattern based on, oh, God damn it.
Yeah, exactly. So he finds him in a bar and tries to recruit him. And to say the least, he's not exactly enthused about taking up the fight again, especially due to the loss of his eyes and his connection to the Force. But as Starkiller points out, he doesn't need his eyes, he needs his mind and everything he knows about fighting the Empire. And after that, they are immediately set upon by stormtroopers, and the level begins.
Yep. Now, one of the things I do love about this level is that it's another example of you using environmental features against your enemy.
Mm-hmm.
This time around, you have the option of using Tibana
gas and carbonite.
Yeah, these your enemies. So it's like there are freaking carbonite hoses that you can pull out of the wall and spray people with to freeze them. There are freaking canisters that you can chuck at people to freeze them, and then you have the option of also shattering the little carbonite statues you create, which is a nice way of making sure people are uber dead.
Exactly, just in case you thought it wasn't effective enough as it was. So basically what happens is they're ambushed by Imperials. They fight, well, actually not just Imperials, Ugrats also attack them, funny enough, in carbonite mechs. Ugnaughts? Sorry.
Yeah,
Ugnaughts. Fight them in carbonite gun mechs, because that's a thing apparently. And it's pretty crazy to throw Ugrats at stormtroopers, but still fun to say the least. And of course, due to the fact that we're on a cloud city, there are various chances to fall down to your death. So try and stay on the ground as much as possible.
Yeah. However, what you are stuck facing against are Imperial jump troopers who are just running around with jetpacks shooting at you. And again, another example of mixed unit tactics making the game challenging, where
And a good way to beat them is, hey, they're wearing jetpacks and I have lightning. I wonder what'll happen if I short circuit their jetpack. Well, you get to find out. You short circuit their jetpack, they go flying and explode, which is very fun.
Yep. And that's actually one of the best things about this game. It's just limitless opportunities to do all those horrible things to stormtroopers that you've always wanted to do. Because they're not people. They're fucking servants of the Empire with scary white masks. Fuck them up all you want. Who cares?
They have more. There's an endless supply, right? Oh, we are terrible people, aren't we, Connor?
Oh, God, yes. Anywho, you come to the end of the level, and this is where we get this level's boss fight, which is the Imperial Shadow Guard. And one of the things I like about this is that it's also touching on the fact that despite the fact that there are only two actual Sith Lords, the Emperor has no qualms about having, basically indoctrinated cult followers running around with lightsabers to do his bidding. So the Inquisitors from Rebels before the Inquisitors from Rebels. Only the Inquisitors were already a thing, and they were a lot better in the old EU. Yes, thank you. Anywho, we got the Shadow Guard. And the thing I really like about the Shadow Guard is that in-game, it's just a guy in black Imperial Guard armor with a lightsaber pike. You fight and you kill him. But when you actually do some reading up on the Shadow Guard, they're actually kind of creepy, because no one knows
where this is touched upon in the comic, but Proxy theorizes that one of the rumors about how the Shadow Guard were created was that they were Jedi who were captured and basically tortured to the point where they lost all sense of individuality and became, just slaves. And that's pretty jacked up when you think about it.
It also kind of represents how so many of Palpatine's servants are basically light copies of Vader himself. Because Vader is a ludicrously powerful cyborg super soldier with advanced dark side abilities. But at the end of the day, as much power as he has over other people, there's one person that he can't do jack all to, and that is the Emperor. And the Emperor is doing what he can to turn every single person in his radius into something like Vader. And that's what the Shadow Guards are. They're another example of those super powerful dark side servants, but they have no identity of their own. They're just extensions of Palpatine's will. They exist only to follow orders and obey.
And in keeping with that idea, the Shadow Guard isn't the most difficult boss, although it is still fun. And after you kill him, we get Coda and Galen Merrick finally resolving to take the fight to the Emperor.
Because Coda eventually decides, it's like, okay, I personally don't want to do anything, but you clearly do, so I'll at least be a good sport and set you up with some of my contacts.
And one of those contacts just happens to be a very familiar senator.
And now we come to the Kashyyyk mission, where Starkiller has come to to rescue someone, but Koda's being very tight-lipped and won't actually tell him anything. So Starkiller's a little bit miffed about that because it's like, dude, what the hell? But
damn it, old man.
Yeah. So he goes down to the planet, and one of the big things is it's kind of its sequencing within the mission kind of varies depending on which version you read. Like the game starts off with has this happen first thing, whereas in the novelization it happens about halfway through his time on Kashyyyk. But he finds his old family home and experiences a vision of his father, Kento Merrick. And this is the point where we'll be discussing the Vader mission. Because in the novelization, the Vader mission is presented as a flashback at this point in the story. Because it's one of the...
In a rather disturbing way.
Exactly. It's basically within the vision as described in the novel. He's not just viewing this thing as a general vision. He's viewing the whole thing from Darth Vader's point of view. And he doesn't realize this until a few minutes in, because he's just like, oh, my breathing's loud in my ears. The world is somehow disconnected, and my limbs feel numb and sluggish. And then he realizes, oh, I'm Vader. And that... Yeah. And for this, I think it's worth discussing the differences in gameplay between the Vader mission and the rest of the game. Because
you use a standard lightsaber for starters in a standard way.
Standard grip. You're just... Yeah. But Vader is also very stalwart and slow. He's not a quick, agile fighter like Merrick. He's more like slow bulldozer advance. And he's also got a lot of his really powerful force abilities already unlocked.
And that's interesting how the game starts you out with full power-ups and then takes them away.
Yeah, kind of teasing what you get. But at the same time, switching over from the Vader physical dynamic where you're kind of restricted and forced to rely more on the Force, to Merrick, who can get away with being a pure physical combatant because he's a lot quicker. But so with this level, you really need to know how to use Vader. You have to adapt your own tactics and gameplay style to go with Vader's limitations. So you can't just rush in, charge at the enemy, and try and bring the fight to them. You're restricted to a slow advance. So really what you got to do is just let them come to you. And
they do come to you because in this level you're fighting Wookiees of various varieties.
Yeah.
Which harkens back to the novel Dark Lord, The Rise of Darth Vader, which it's loosely implied that this was the same mission, but we'll not get into the whole timeline thing.
Yeah. So you're fighting against Wookiees, and you carve your way through them, and you get to the boss fight of the level, which is the Jedi survivor, Kento Merrick. And again, it's discussed in the novel that Kento Merrick is basically your classic level 1 boss fight, where he's a challenge, but at the end of the day, compared to the guys you take on later, he's a bit of a pushover. He's
no shock T.
He's more of an ease you into the game mechanics and teach you how to approach the bosses, but without being too OP, because the whole point is that you're Vader. You're the dominant figure. You're the unstoppable juggernaut, and everyone else here is just the cardboard cutouts for you to knock over.
And he does put up quite a fight, but yeah, Vader handles him pretty thoroughly, and the battle eventually takes them inside the hut. Where Vader basically is choking him out, and he says, I sent someone far more powerful nearby. Where is your master? And Kento basically says, you killed my master. I'm the only one here. But then suddenly
Vader's lightsaber gets yanked out of his hand by a little kid. And this is baby Starkiller. And then Vader finishes killing off Kento, crushes his throat, and then a bunch of stormtroopers walk into the room, see the kid standing there with Vader's lightsaber, and prepare to open fire. Vader appears to take the initiative, reclaims his lightsaber, kills the stormtroopers, and then tells the little kid to come with him. And that leads into his apprenticeship, and then that's this is actually a really interesting moment in the novel where, following this vision, Starkiller basically finds himself becoming the embodiment of the Sith Stalker armor featured in the dark side ending to the game, fighting against a Jedi avatar of himself. And this thing is, I would say it's properly featured in the Jedi Temple DLC mission, which we'll be covering later. But it basically kind of represents the core conflict of his life. This is the point where he's realizing that if he truly gives himself over to the dark side and embraces it wholeheartedly, he'll basically be sacrificing his soul, and he'll basically become just Vader Mark II, because at the end of the day, Palpatine, for anyone who understands anything about Palpatine wants to reign forever as the dark side demigod. He doesn't want an apprentice who can truly succeed him, regardless of what he says. He wants an apprentice who's an upgrade on Vader.
Exactly. And by contrast, the sequence also showcases Jedi version of Galen Marek, which is his real name. And it kind of showcases, hey, what he could have become had fate not intervened.
Yeah.
Shows the dichotomy. So it basically shows him what he could become and what he could have been. And now he's just sitting here in the middle, not sure where he wants to go.
And this is the point where he also learns his actual birth name, Galen.
Galen Marek. And he even gets,
Now, he spends a lot of the rest of the storyline still referring to himself as Starkiller or the Apprentice, but eventually he does come to embrace the name and call himself Galen.
Exactly. He also is visited by the spirit of his father, who tells him, "I'm very sorry, I did not want any of this for you." And that really touches Starkiller, to say the least. And he also acquires his father's crystal, his blue crystal.
Yeah, which he switches out, puts into his lightsaber later on, and has the blue lightsaber that is identified with him.
Well, turquoise, because he still keeps Coda's crystal in there too. So the green and the blue mix, which I really do wish they put in the game. That would have been interesting. Oh well.
But yeah, so after all of this story stuff, all of this backstory stuff, we get Starkiller's encounter with Princess Leia, and he figures out that she is the one that he was sent to rescue. And then before he leaves, she tells him, if you're truly a Jedi, destroy the Skyhook, because for anyone who doesn't know, the Empire conquered Kashyyyk specifically because they wanted to use the Wookiees as slave labor. And this Skyhook that they're building is basically intended as a staging area for shipping out Wookiee slaves.
Yeah, they're building something very big and round. I wonder what it is.
Yep.
So he destroys the Skyhook and also has a little encounter with Oswick Stern, who's quite the interesting Imperial, to say the least. Hunter man. Basically, he's Kraven the Hunter from Spider-Man.
Only walking around in an Imperial uniform with a frickin' sash made of Wookiee pelts over one shoulder because he's a douchebag.
Yeah, as you do. Needless to say, Marek takes care of him rather handily and destroys the Skyhook. And then he goes back with Coda, and he's like, what the hell? Who was she? And Coda reveals that who she was and that his contact was Bail Organa.
Yeah. And then we actually get a little moment in the game and the novel that I liked where Coda's like, Bail Organa went looking for Shaak Ti, and the last time I heard from him, went missing on Felucia, but Marek by mistake heads him off and says Felucia, kind of an inadvertent little tell that he kind of realized, oh shit, I shouldn't have said that. I just gave Coda a clue as to who I actually am.
Blew his cover.
Yeah.
Yep.
And the thing I really like about that is that it's revealed later in the game, like at the very end, that Coda all along suspected who he was working with, but kept those suspicions to himself because he knew that his own life was at risk. If he revealed that he knew or suspected, he'd probably get killed. So the thing I like is that both of them are trying to pass off that moment and reveal that I don't know. They're trying to basically hide the fact I know that you know that you know, that whole thing. And it's like, you think it's just Merrick trying to pass this off, but when you actually pay attention to Koda's own interaction, he's just like, I'm going to pretend that you didn't say that.
Exactly. So their next plot is Felucia, but unfortunately, the planet has gone through a bit of a metamorphosis since last time.
Which is actually a big theme to mention to talk about in this game, because from this point on, until you get to the final mission of the game, every single planet you're visiting is a revisit of an old level, but with the theme being that now that you've gone through and killed the Jedi protector of this world, who was kind of keeping the Empire at bay, now the Empire has been allowed to move in and just fuck it up.
So we're back on Felucia, and needless to say, things have gone pretty south since we last visited it. Maris Brood has gone crazy, the Felucians have all turned to the dark side, and the Imperial is running amok. And unfortunately, the primary example of this being
the Mega Sarlacc armature. Basically, it's described in the level itself that the Felucians, in their guerrilla fight against the Empire, took to hiding inside the digestive tract of the Mega Sarlacc. So to root them out, the Empire built a gigantic armature that extended down the fucking Sarlacc's throat with an elevator so they could just go in there, hunt down the Felucians, and shoot things up. Now,
yeah, basically stomach pumping to the extreme.
Yeah, we don't care for Sarlaccs. If you know anything about Sarlaccs, they're kind of scary and horrific, but this is truly just a new depth of terrifying depravity. This thing is a living creature that's, has thoughts and feelings, and the Empire is casually subjecting it to true horrific pain.
I know we're not talking as much about gameplay mechanics now, but what's crazy about this is even in the game, like Galen Merrick is like repulsed by this. And given his line of work, that takes a lot. I mean, we're talking about a freaking assassin here. Yeah. And even he is like, what the hell is this?
What? Who? Why?
Which really goes to show you that the freaking lengths that the Empire will go to accomplish their goals.
And this is also the big moment where Galen Merrick, he starts really solidifying himself as he still wants to take control of the Empire, but this is the point in the novel where he starts considering just taking control for himself so he can fix things. But this is the point where his imperial patriotism is starting to just die off because he's realizing that the Empire truly is just an outgrowth of Palpatine's malice.
Yeah. So he fights through the Dark Felucians and the Empire by going into the freaking Sarlacc, but he gets spit out eventually. And he eventually finds Bail Organa being held hostage by Maris Brood, who has gone a little bit loopy, as I mentioned.
Yes.
And we're also introduced to the most terrifying Rancor of all time.
The Bull Rancor. Which is basically the gimmick behind this boss fight is that Maris Brood is using force concealment to hide herself while using her telepathic control over the Rancor to basically just sick it on you while she kind of occasionally just darts in and tries to backstab when you're distracted. It's another example of a boss fight where if you know how to handle it, you can get through it pretty easily. But if you don't know what you're doing, you're going to die because...
Yeah. Because you got like a 20-foot bull going after you, and then you have an invisible witch who's trying to stab you in the back at every turn. Not exactly the most stress-free situation you could possibly be in.
Yeah. It's like even the novelization kind of stresses how difficult the Bull Rancor is to fight because its sheer bulk, as well as its hard exterior armor-plated skin, it makes it super resistant to a lot of his force abilities. It's like his lightning is just causing superficial damage to its skin. It's not even penetrating into its tissues. His telekinesis, it's just shrugging it off because it's so fucking huge. It's
like going at a Tyrannosaurus with an ice pick.
Yeah. Pretty much the only way he's actually able to do any real damage is by basically just jumping inside its mouth, unleashing telekinesis, and just hacking away wildly with his lightsaber inside its mouth.
Yes, the direct approach, to say the least. But he does eventually take it down and fights Marisol by himself, and needless to say, he defeats her pretty handily.
Yeah, but this is another example of a perfect example of how if you're not prepared to deal with Maris Brood, even on her own, she's still
Right.
super difficult to fight because her force concealment allows her to just go in for hit and run attacks where you have difficulty keeping track of her. It's like even when you know how to play against her, it's like the only cue you have to her location is an occasional little distortion effect that pops up.
It's also probably worth mentioning that, as we discussed earlier, how Galen Merrick popularized the reverse grip, Maris Brood popularized the lightsaber tonfas.
Yeah, which in a way it kind
We
of
discussed
shows.
that in our lightsaber video, how those things suck, so we don't need to go
Yeah.
into those.
But the one thing I will say about them is that they perfectly represent the kind of threat that Maris Brood represents. She's not some overbearing, powerful thing. She's insubstantial and subversive. Those are the sorts of weapons where if you don't know how to deal with them, the other person can just flail them at you and hack you apart pretty quickly. But if you know exactly what they're doing and what their game is, suddenly they're useless.
Makes it unique, to say the least. So anyway, he defeats her, and basically he has her at her mercy, and she begs for him to stop. And he even kind of gives her kind of a twisted version of the speech Shaak Ti gave to him, calling her a slave to the dark side, and basically saying he would do the galaxy a favor by taking her out.
Yeah. Now, one of the other things I did like is that in the novel, during the fight, he actually notices their extreme similarities and
Yeah.
comments on this. And for a moment there, he's like, we're both Darksiders. We should be allies. But then he realizes the whole treachery is the way of the Sith argument, and that Darksiders are never truly allied with each other. They're always just out for themselves. Any alliances they form are always temporary. The and that in itself demonstrates Galen Merrick's true misunderstanding of the dark side and why, when he realizes this, he turns away from it. He always assumed that the dark side was just a mirror image of the light side and that all Darksiders should stand together in unity as Darksiders. But now he's realizing that no, to be a Darksider is to give yourself over purely to yourself. There is nothing in the universe that is greater than you. You're trying to bring everything under your umbrella. You cannot tolerate the presence of other Darksiders because they are rivals.
Exactly, which, you know, really makes him realize that there are personality types of all kinds, even if they're on the same side of the Force, which leads into him eventually sparing her.
Yeah.
And she runs off into the forest. And what's funny is Bail Organa, as he sees her walk away, comments on how he knew a Jedi who was easily seduced by the dark side and how he had some reservations about her being set free. Hint, hint, nudge, nudge, someone we know.
Anakin Skywalker.
Bingo.
Yep.
So he recruits Bail Organa and reports back to Vader. And well, first of all, Bail says, I have some allies who could be willing to join us if you're willing to lead us, but they're going to need, something big to convince them that the Empire is vulnerable in some way. So he goes to Vader and asks him, hey, what's something I could do that'll really get the Emperor's attention? And Vader responds with, well, there's this shipyard on Raxus Prime that makes Star Destroyers. Destroy that, and that'll definitely get his attention. So that leads us into the next mission, where things get even more complicated.
Now that we're back on Raxus Prime, it's another example of a level revisit exploring the consequences of your actions. And one of the most direct ways in which this is featured is actually just comes up in the novelization, where you directly encounter the leader of the Rodian salvagers that we mentioned earlier, this guy called Drexel Rouge. And he directly explains to Merrick that when you killed that crazy old Jedi in his junk temple, he was the only thing keeping the Empire out of here. And now that he's gone, they've moved in and they've stolen all of our good salvage, and now we're stuck having to go for scraps while being hunted by Imperials. Because fuck you, dude.
So things are going swimmingly for them, to say the least.
Yep. And as you're going, it's another example where as you're going through the level, you're facing two separate enemy factions who are fighting each other as well as you. So you actually see the Rodian salvagers trying to fight back against the Empire and not get killed, But the problem is that when you look at just how well established the Empire already is, they're laboring at a serious disadvantage here.
Yeah, a bunch of scrappers versus a intergalactic federation with almost limitless resources. Not
Yeah,
exactly what I would call level playing field.
yeah. So you're basically what what the characters what the characters decide to do to destroy the Star Destroyer shipyard above is Merrick decides to break into the big ore cannon that the Empire is using to basically just send raw materials and ores up to the facility so they can be collected and used to build Star Destroyers. He basically decides to just hijack the ore cannon and get it to target the shipyard directly and destroy it. So he goes into there to do that, and this is where we encounter the big boss fight in the game, Proxy.
Yes, Proxy decides to make a move here. However, his motivation for doing so is very different depending on which version you go by, because in the video game, he's acting on his own accord and taking this opportunity to attack Merrick himself. In the novel, he's actually being controlled by the core of the planet, Raxus Prime, which is basically this crazy supercomputer, literally called the Core, who's accessing his memories and basically using him as a puppet. What are your thoughts on which one do you prefer, Connor?
Um, Actually, I prefer the version of the fight presented in the game because it's Proxy just
I
following
agree.
through on his programming and still having agency as a character. Whereas the Proxy featured in the game is basically just reduced to a puppet of someone else. It's like it's
You mean the book?
symbolic of, yeah, sorry, Proxy in the book, my mistake. It's symbolic of what Proxy is, but I prefer the subtler symbolism of him just acting on his programming and targeting Merrick. And
Yeah,
the
I
boss
honestly feel. Oh, sorry.
and the boss fight itself is actually really interesting because throughout the fight, Proxy cycles through all of his different combat modules, so you actually end up getting into rematches with some of your established opponents.
Yeah, I also feel like the version in the book was trying too hard to make Proxy seem like not a bad guy, quote unquote. And I just felt like they were trying too hard to make us not hate this character, when in reality, like you said, he's just following his programming and doing what he was built to do.
Yeah, I prefer
Not
the
him
idea.
being out of character at all.
Yeah, it's like Proxy in the book. It's kind of the same idea as humanizing the clone troopers in TCW. It's like they're trying to say, no, he's not a bad guy. He's just a puppet. Whereas I prefer the version of the character in the game because he is a bad guy, but he doesn't realize he's a bad guy. Which goes back to
Yeah.
what I was saying earlier about Proxy's naivete. He doesn't understand the reality of death. He doesn't realize that killing Merrick means killing Merrick. He
Yeah.
thinks that's like, oh, he'll just do what I do. He'll get stabbed in the chest, but then he'll get up. So who cares?
Exactly. So basically, Merrick's stuck fighting all these different forms of Jedi, and eventually Proxy breaks out his secret weapon, a module he's stored for a long time, which turns out to be Darth Maul, which is rather interesting to say the least.
Yeah, this particular boss fight is surprisingly tricky because
Yeah.
it's very because the Maul character that Proxy is using is very lightsaber centric. What he really likes to do is just close in and hammer on you with his saber staff, which is exactly what you have difficulty dealing with because this game has kind of been encouraging you to rely more on force abilities, to rely more on ranged powers and be at a distance. And then you got this character that's specifically optimized to combat that strategy.
Yeah, the block button definitely is your friend in this particular fight, and it is not easy, that's for sure. You have to time your blocks correctly, and you have to make sure he doesn't just come up and eviscerate you limb from limb. But it is fun. It is definitely a fun ride, and seeing him use Darth Maul's tactics, because it actually is very reminiscent of the Phantom Menace, Duel of Fates. There's a lot of, breaking ground, getting to higher places, and, switching off from attack and defense on a dime.
Yeah. And the other thing is that it also really highlights the similarities between Galen Merrick and Darth Maul. Because at the end of the day, they were trained in much the same way and served the same purpose for their respective masters.
Which also makes you wonder whether or not, because since the mimicry of Maul is just so correct, and like you said before, it's highly implied that Vader built Proxy, it kind of implies also that the Emperor most likely gave Vader kind of like a rundown on how he trained Maul and who Maul is, which is
Yeah,
how Vader knew how to program it so correctly.
yeah. So, and the fight
But
ends with.
yeah,
Sorry.
you go
The
ahead.
Yeah, the boss fight ends. You pin Proxy as Maul to the wall with his own lightsabers and just leave him there and go to complete the mission. And you redirect the ore cannon, blow up the Star Destroyer shipyard, and then you get a moment in the game and the story that's super, super epic, but in gameplay is such a pain.
Oh my God, yes. You have
The
to pull down a Star Destroyer with the little, basically by doing this,
yeah.
while TIE fighters are while you're being interrupted by TIE fighters every single second.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
This is actually one area where the PS2 and the Wii versions didn't have this mini game. They just had it be a direct cinematic, and that was the right call because making it a mini game in the game, that mini game is so frustrating, and it really sours my taste because the level is otherwise really good. It's a brilliant revisit of Raxus Prime that manages to not be a total retread because in addition to going through the established junk environments, you're also going through the Imperial facility.
Right. And yeah, like I said, to say it's frustrating is an understatement, but he does eventually end up to do it. And this particular sequence, so to say, has caused a lot of controversy over the years because people really like to use this feat, so to speak, as more or less justification for what Merrick can or can't do. And I think there's been a lot of
whether pointing at it as an example of how this game is a complete exaggeration and shouldn't be taken seriously, or pointing at it as an example of just how godly powerful force wielders really are, but no one really stops and thinks about it this way. That Star Destroyer that Merrick was pulling down was already coming in for a crash landing. And all Merrick did was take a Star Destroyer that was coming in for a crash landing and force it into a direct nosedive. All he did was just grab the nose and do this. He didn't grab the whole Star Destroyer and just do whatever. He grabbed the nose and did this.
Yes, and it's not immediately apparent in the game, but the novelization really hammers in the fact that this was not easy for him to do. In fact, it took all of his concentration and all of his energy, and even then, he was barely able to do it. He did almost get crushed.
Yeah. So once this whole thing goes down, Star Destroyer crashes, and Merrick is just picking himself up out of the wreckage. And that's the point where he manages to find Proxy, who survived the crash also. And Proxy reveals that his primary program got burnt out in the whole crashing. He sustained too much damage, and his processors were damaged. Now he's no longer got his programming, and he's just like, I'm useless to you now. I have no purpose. I can't just keep on killing you. And Merrick's like, no, you're useful to me. I'm not leaving you. You are my friend. Come on, let's get out of here. And this is actually the moment where the novelization itself really starts developing Proxy as a character, because without his primary programming to skew his perceptions, he starts realizing stuff. Like connecting the dots, putting things together, and realizes just what he was trying to do by being programmed to kill Merrick. He realizes that, oh wait, if I kill him, he's dead. What have we done?
Yeah, it's a form of humanization, which, unlike the mind control thing, actually works for his character and goes a long way towards making him more relatable.
Yeah. It's like he's stripped of his indoctrination and realizes what he is. And one of my favorite bits is he actually goes and directly apologizes to Juno for causing her any distress.
Yeah, it's very powerful, actually. So after they leave Raxus Prime, they're successful. The Emperor is enraged. He's very upset that all of this happened, and the Alliance leaders are now ready to cooperate. And they meet to cooperate, and things happen. All right, next up, we have the formation of the Galactic Alliance on the world of Corellia, which, for those of you really into the old expanded universe, is actually a reference to the actual Treaty of Corellia, which was where the Alliance was actually formed in the old expanded universe. In this meeting, Bail Organa has managed to gather Garn Bel Iblis and Mon Mothma, who you may remember from the original trilogy and the prequels and even Rogue One. And Galen Merrick is basically helming this meeting, and they basically say, okay, now's the time to fight. I will do this. He will do this. The galaxy will be free. And of course, everything can't go swimmingly. And guess what happens?
This is the point where the Empire attacks, and Vader reveals that Vader shows up leading the charge, commanding that all of the politicians on hand be captured. Ram Koda, who's basically pulled his shit back together because he had Merrick's example to inspire him, tries to attack Vader, and this is a perfect demonstration of just how powerful Vader is. Ram Koda, a powerful Jedi Master and a very difficult boss character with really great telekinesis, rushes Vader, and Vader just casually manhandles him with telekinesis and tosses him aside like he's nothing.
And then, as Connor mentioned before, picks up a big table and flings it at Merrick, virtually killing him. Well, virtually. Yep. He's hanging on the side of a cliff, and they basically start lecturing each other. Yeah. Well, it's more so Galen just screaming and Darth Vader just being Vader.
Yeah. But still, it's like Vader basically reveals that, no, you were never intended to be my real secret apprentice. You were just a pawn. So, and this is what your purpose was. You were just intended to be a red herring to gather all of the emperors in one place so we could just scoop them all up. And now that you've done that, we don't need you. So.
And he goes for that final blow when suddenly Obi-Wan Kenobi steps in and fights Darth Vader. Perplexing twist, to say the least.
Yep.
But it's later revealed that this is actually Proxy using his most advanced training module, and it goes about as well as you'd expect.
Vader curb stomps him.
Yeah. But it did give Galen a moment to slip away. And by slip away, I mean let go and fall down a cliff.
Yeah.
But hey, the snow gave him pretty good cover, hopefully. even in the comic book, Juno mentions how she was amazed that he survived such a huge drop. But, hey, that goes back to his cybernetic enhancements, I suppose.
It's another example of him just being able to take an ungodly amount of punishment and not die.
Yeah. Needless to say, he is pretty peeved about this betrayal because basically everything he has been told his entire life and everything he's worked towards has been a complete lie because it's the Sith way. But he realizes now that he is completely free and now can set about making things right.
And this is the point where Merrick basically properly commits to being a Jedi and basically says, fuck the Sith, and shows up running around in a freaking white robe with a blue lightsaber, very obviously Jedi. He discovers the location of the Death Star by going into a meditation trance. He and Juno go to the Death Star, and we get the farewell scene where they finally kiss.
Yes, and what are your thoughts on this relationship, Connor?
Well, it's almost the antithesis of the Anakin-Padme relationship. The Anakin-Padme relationship was a pretty standard boy meets girl, but it comes from a place of deeply fucked up because both of them are just so dangerously obsessed with each other, whereas this relationship is a non-standard fucked up situation, but it's coming from a good place. It's two damaged individuals just kind of reaching out to each other for some bit of human compassion and warmth in their horrible lives. And they know it can't last, but they're willing to accept that because at least right now we have this.
I think if nothing else, you do feel that these two people really do care for each other and they have actually taken time to establish them going through the various stages of getting to know each other. So at least it has that. But needless to say, yeah, they kiss and Galen Merrick plunges into the Death Star. And as you do when you plunge into a giant death station, he encounters obstacles.
Many obstacles. Now, one of my favorite things I love about the cinematic is that they show him actually just falling through the Death Star superstructure. And one of my favorite aspects is that this is the first time we truly get a good understanding, a good frame of reference for just the sheer scale of the Death Star. Its sheer incredible size. This thing is massive. It's like he
Yeah.
falls through like 2 miles of superstructure.
Yeah, I mean, it's as big as a freaking moon, and moons are pretty enormous, to say the least,
Yeah. So he fights his way through
despite
the
despite
level.
it being the smallest one ever made.
Yes. So discussing the gameplay in the Death Star mission, just briefly touching on this. You're only taking on established Imperial units. It's pretty much the same stuff as before. What really makes this so impressive is the environment itself, because you're going through all of the mechanisms for the Death Star super laser, and it's kind of fun being able to play around with some of the mechanics, like, say, pick up an Imperial stormtrooper and chuck him into the laser just as it's firing and disintegrate him.
Yes, we also get a little bit of a lesson on how the super laser actually works. Juno even comments how what it basically is it's hundreds and hundreds of small lasers being condensed into just this one gargantuan beam that's just focused on the singular point. So it's basically like a whole bunch of magnifying glasses all set up together. And I'm not exaggerating there. There's literally rings around each laser that look like magnifying glasses.
Yeah. And one of the things that's touched on in the novel is that Galen Merrick realizes that, oh, wait, this whole thing is built as a planet killer. That basically means that all of the Empire's established terror tactics just aren't good enough for oppressing the populace, and that Palpatine is basically resorting to casual genocide, the destruction of entire planets just for shits and giggles, basically. And this is the point where he realizes that every single thing that the Sith and the Empire stands for is just an abomination and needs to be destroyed.
Well, once you reach that level of insanity, you're kind of asking for it.
Yeah. So he breaks into the Emperor's observation dome, and this is the point where we have the big major boss fights in the game. First, a fight with Darth Vader, followed up by a fight with Emperor Palpatine.
Depending on which ending you pick.
Depending on which ending you pick. So the fight with Vader it's one
hard.
of the toughest. Oh God, Vader's a death machine.
We were talking about Shaak Ti and Kodo before, and this is every bit as challenging. Like, this is a grind. Like, if you think you've learned enough up to this point that you could just coast through the remaining boss fights, Vader don't play that way. Not even close.
No. Oh God. This is so few people truly have any understanding of just how dangerous and powerful Darth Vader is, because they're using their benchmark. Their benchmark for his capabilities is the movies, which are nothing less than his weakest showings, because for various reasons in all those fights he's holding back. Here, he's not holding back. He's going all out with all of his abilities, trying to kill you. And it's like, what's he doing? Oh, staggering you back 10 feet with scary brute force power strikes. Oh, ragdolling you with telekinesis and smashing you against the wall. Oh, picking shit up and throwing it at you. Oh, standing there and just charging up a super powerful force push that sends you flying halfway across the arena and kills half your health. It's like,
and you definitely got to get creative to get through this particular boss fight. This is a sense where chaining your attacks together really comes in handy, because it's the only real way you could stun him. In fact, the two surefire ways to get through Vader is lightning and channeling the surges through the ground, because what are two Vader's biggest weaknesses? He's slow and heavy, and he's vulnerable to lightning. That's pretty much your safest bet. And even then, you're not guaranteed.
Because
anything.
This guy can take a whole heck of a lot of hits. Like Vader, Vader is, you got to whittle away at him, and rightly so. Because this guy, the thing is that Darth Vader is a cyborg super soldier wrapped up in heavy blast dampening armor with a big heavy helmet. It's like, even if you hit him hard enough to get through his armor, good luck hitting anything that isn't already an add-on, because his freaking limbs are all prosthetic. This guy can take a hit to the wrist and not care, because it's not his arm.
Yeah, Galen Merrick has to chip away at Vader in the most literal sense. Like, he's literally like just slowly knocking off pieces and chipping off pieces of armor. And there's a little bit of character in play with this one too, particularly in novelization, because he realizes just how, quote unquote, inhuman his master truly is.
Yeah, this is the point where the extent to which Darth Vader is just not normal anymore is really made clear. It's like,
it's
Darth
character
Vader,
deconstruction in the most literal sense.
Yeah, and it's like the quick time event at the end of the boss fight where you take down Vader. Like that's a perfect demonstration of just how resilient Vader is. To give you a blow-by-blow description, you stagger Vader back with telekinesis and then use these big heavy metal pipes to crush him, and then Vader just crawls out from under them, gets back up, and gets ready to fight again, even though it's like his armor is rent. You can see his prosthetics, there's exposed flesh, but he just gets ready to fight. And you manage to score a few superficial hits on his mechanical limbs. You stagger him back, but he's not really impeded. He's just kind of trips over. And then you hammer him with overhand blows, manage to get through his defenses, and strike his helmet. But you don't cut through his helmet, you tear his helmet off. And
that upper piece.
Yeah. And then it's like...
And then you slam him onto a laser grid, pick him up again, spin him around, and then hit him through a window into the throne room. And he's still alive, despite the fact that he's literally like in this smoking heap. And it's interesting because this is also the very first time Galen Merrick sees Vader without his helmet, and he sees just how quote-unquote weak his master truly is inside.
Just how pathetic he is. He's just this scarred, hairless thing. And but the thing is that this scarred, hairless thing is still a terrifying opponent, because if you decide to go for the dark side ending and go to finish off Vader, well, you're locked into a tiny little box with Darth Vader. There is nothing to throw. All you can do is rely on lightsaber combat and direct force abilities. And oh my God.
Yeah. Still quite a challenge. You think being all broken up would make him easy? Nope. Nope. And which, speaking of the endings, which this plays into the story, he has Vader at his mercy, and Palpatine is just doing the Palpatine thing. Like we said, Sam Witwer just hamming it up to no end as Palpatine. He's like, yes, kill him. He was weak and broken. Kill him and you could finally take your place at my side. And there is a moment where Galen is tempted, but then suddenly Ram Koda gets his wind and his connection to the Force is reestablished, and basically he just charges the Emperor, uses the Force to take the Emperor's lightsaber, cuts down two of his guards, and just rushes at him. But that works about as well as when Rey tried to charge at Snoke in the latest movie, aka not very well.
Yeah.
And he just starts shooting him with lightning, and Code is just agonizing in pain, and Bail Organa is like, help him, what are you doing? And this is where the game basically gives you two options that lead into two different endings.
Fight Vader or attack the Emperor. And discussing the boss fight with Palpatine.
I hated it.
Oh God, it's so
I'm going to be completely honest here, such a letdown. I'm not trying to brag or anything, but I am not a hardcore gamer, and I got through this on my first try. It's really disappointing. I mean, this is the Emperor, for Pete's sake. This is like the biggest bad guy of the entire franchise, and his boss fight is so lame.
Actually,
lame.
I disagree. When you're playing the Palpatine boss fight on the higher difficulties, I hate the boss fight, but I hate it for the exact same reasons. For me, it's not easy. It's a grind, and it's a super, super annoying grind. It's unpleasant to play for me because, well, it's like Palpatine here. Firstly, commenting on his actual combat animations and what he does within the fight, he relies purely on Force. Yeah. No lightsaber. He relies purely on Force abilities, just kind of darting around with Force speed and shooting you with lightning and occasionally throwing stuff at you. On one level, I do appreciate how this represents kind of a natural evolution from what we saw in Revenge of the Sith, because when you actually look at his big fight with Yoda in the movie, the lightsaber duel was a write-off. He failed that. He couldn't beat Yoda in lightsaber combat. But the second he switched over to attacking Yoda purely with his Force abilities, he pretty much had Yoda on the run. So what does he do? He takes that lesson, doubles down on his Force abilities, and he's using a lot of those exact same tactics that he used against Yoda there, only against you here. So it's like he's using levitation to be 10 feet off the ground where you can't actually reach him with your lightsaber. He's got a lightning shield, so you can't attack him. and he's just levitating stuff and chucking it at you and just fucking you up from a distance.
I suppose. I mean, it does keep in with his character. I just personally didn't enjoy it.
It is in keeping with his character, but playing the boss fight, oh my god, it's a grind in all of the worst possible ways. It's because the problem is that Palpatine is a super unfair, spammy fighter, which, in keeping with his character, perfect expression of what it actually is like to fight him. He's frustrating to fight, frustrating by design, but
fair enough.
It's a perfect representation of Palpatine's character and his approach, but as a video game boss fight, it's not a very good fight because it's just...
Yeah, I see what you mean. And I think I'd be remiss without pointing out that this fight, it's relatively similar in the comic book, but the novelization has something way different.
Yeah, the novelization doesn't even bother with the fight at all. It's just Galen Merrick throws stuff at Palpatine, and Palpatine just deliberately falls over, plays weak, and says, "Yes, kill me, strike me down in anger, and be a Darksider, yay!" And, well, this is the point where we get the big character moment. Yep. Galen really wants to do it, because it's like, this guy's a maniac. He's not actually fallen, he's just playing weak. We can't turn our back on this guy, he'll fuck us up, I gotta kill him. But Romco's like, dude, if you do it now, you're just murdering him out of vengeance. You're just, you're executing someone and doing an immoral act. And the thing I do like about this is that there are a lot of layers and a lot of different ways that this scene could be interpreted. On a purely practical level, I think Merrick is in the right. You got to take down Palpatine right here, right now, when he's not in any position to defend himself. But on the flip side, the Force is still the Force, and if you murder someone in anger, even if it's someone who deserves to be murdered, end of the day, you're just dooming yourself.
Yeah, it's one of those great. It's the great moral question that Star Wars has grappled with since the beginning. Honestly, whether or not doing something like that is morally just, even if that individual is terrible, it'll still scar your soul. Yeah, that's the nature of the Force.
It's like, what do you do? Do you make your decision on the basis of necessity and pragmatism, or do you try and hold true to your morals and hold on to your soul? And that, in a way, is also kind of a representation of the differences between the Jedi and the Sith. A Sith Lord faced with that dilemma would murder Palpatine without hesitation, because it's like, even if you got a Sith Lord who doesn't want the reign of the dark side, he'd still make the pragmatic decision. He'd still sacrifice his soul to do this, but he would consider it a worthwhile trade. And in a way, if you think about if there were a Sith Lord who didn't want to dominate the galaxy, who did just want to ensure that the Sith never truly dominated, like basically Darth Red,
Exactly. But at the end of the day, Merrick does decide to spare him, and they're just about to leave, but then again, the Emperor does not like being snubbed, so he attacks. First he attacks Coda, and then Galen Merrick basically flings himself in front of him, and they get into a Force duel, which is pretty interesting.
Yeah. Basically, in the novelization describes this as the one moment where Galen Merrick gives himself over to the light side of the Force without reservation, completely and utterly, becomes a true Jedi. And it's basically stated that his power with the Force now makes his feats as a Darksider look like those of a child. Because, this is basically him being... Well, this is him being amped up by a whole lot of things. This is circumstantial as hell. He's not capable of this on the normal... regularly. But what is he doing? Giving himself completely to the light side, which gives him the ability to use Tuta Minis and absorb the Emperor's lightning, and he's able to just use that same energy and turn it around against the Sith Lords, which results in a massive Force explosion that just devastates the environment. And the rebels escape in the chaos, and Merrick gets killed, with Vader and Palpatine both injured, standing over his body. And Palpatine's like, well, this went badly.
Now we have an alliance that's going to do everything they can to take us down. Brilliant.
And they got a martyr to rally around because of this fucking kid.
Everything went to shit. But there is still hope. The rebels regroup on Kashyyyk, and again, they're reaffirming their idea to form an alliance, and they end up using, ironically enough, Galen Merrick's family crest as their symbol for the alliance. And then we get this little character moment, which Connor mentioned before, about how Coda basically confesses that he sort of knew all along who he was. And Juno even asks, why'd you help us? And he was like, I sensed good in him, yada, yada. And basically they look up into the sky towards a bright new tomorrow, and we fade to black.